She hadn't meant to fall asleep out there. Not like that. But it was the second night she'd laid curled by the railroad tracks, arms wrapped around herself, coat pulled tight, one shoe missing. Her name was Emily, and she was 17. The cold had pressed deep into her skin, but she didn't care anymore. Not about the cold, not about anything. She told herself she was just resting her eyes, but her body had given up long before her mind had. The sound of trains in the distance didn't scare her. Nothing did anymore. Her face was smudged with dirt, her lips cracked from the wind, and her hair hung in greasy tangles. Her hands, once soft and nimble from helping her mother sew, were scraped up from climbing fences and digging through trash behind the general store. She had a secret, one no one back in her hometown would believe if she told it. Not the preacher's wife, not the lady at the bakery who always gave her a crust of bread for free. Not even her own brother, who used to sit beside her and hum tunes while they shelled peas. That secret had driven her to run. She told herself over and over it wasn't her fault. But it was. In the quiet parts of the night, she knew it was. 2 days by the tracks, and no one had asked her name. A man passed her once, older, with a horse and a saddlebag full of jerky. He glanced her way but kept going. Another time, a couple in a buggy looked at her, then turned their heads like she wasn't there. Maybe they thought she was drunk or touched in the head. Maybe they didn't want to know. Truth was, Emma wasn't sure she existed anymore either. The town she'd ended up in wasn't on any map she'd ever studied in school. It was dry and dusty, the kind of place where people wore their hats low and spoke in half sentences. Everyone had a story, but nobody told it. There was a saloon with crooked shutters and a church that only opened on Sundays if someone died. A sign near the old well said Hope Springs, but she hadn't seen Hope in a while. Emma didn't ask for help. She didn't trust it. People who offered kindness too fast often wanted something back. Her uncle had taught her that. He used to give her candy when he came to visit. Then he'd started asking her to keep secrets. One secret too many, and she climbed out the bedroom window and didn't look back. So she slept near the tracks because it was just far enough from the main street that no one noticed her. She scavenged a half-eaten apple from the trash behind the mercantile. She drank water from the horse trough when no one was looking. Her coat still smelled like home, lavender soap and tobacco, and sometimes she'd bury her nose in it and let herself cry a little. The world wasn't what she'd been told. Back home, they said God sees all and good people always find each other. But she'd seen good people trampled. Her mother worked herself to the bone and still died with nothing. Her teacher cared about her and got run off after someone spread lies. And Emma, she tried to tell someone what her uncle did. The sheriff had smiled too much and told her not to ruin a good man's name. So no, she didn't believe in good people anymore. She believed in staying quiet and keeping to herself. She believed in running when someone looked at her too long. She believed the world was cracked down the middle and people just learned how to walk on the edge without falling in. But that second night, she didn't have the strength to run. Her belly ached from hunger and her fingers were stiff. She pressed her face into the dirt and whispered her brother's name. Not because she thought he'd come, just because it felt like the only part of her life that hadn't gone sour. And that's when she heard it, a voice. Low, steady, not sharp like the men she'd met before. A calm voice that didn't try to scare her or promise anything. Just 3 words. Come with me. She blinked hard, unsure she was dreaming. Her body was too tired to move, but her eyes lifted, and there he was. A man in a worn hat, boots dusty and cracked at the toes. His coat was patched, but clean. His face looked carved from rock, but his eyes weren't cold. They were tired too. Tired in a way that told her he knew something about her kind of hurt. She didn't say anything, just stared at him. He knelt beside her, not too close. He didn't touch her, didn't reach out. He just said it again, softer this time. Come with me. Emma had heard 100 voices in her life, some sweet, some cruel, but this one didn't fit into either. It wasn't trying to pull her in or push her away. It just waited. She wanted to ask why. Why her? Why now? But she didn't have the words. All she could do was nod, barely, like a leaf in the wind. He stood slowly, careful not to spook her, and offered his hand. She didn't take it right away. But after a moment, she pushed herself up, legs shaking, and followed. They didn't talk much as they walked, just the crunch of boots on gravel and the distant hum of a windmill. She didn't even ask his name. She didn't want to break whatever quiet spell held them together. She figured he'd leave her at the edge of town, maybe give her a blanket or some bread. She'd take it and keep going. But he didn't leave. He brought her to a small cabin outside the town line, past a creek with frogs that croaked like old men. The place looked like it had been built by hand, every board and nail placed with care. There was a fence, crooked in spots, and a dog too old to bark. He unlocked the door and held it open. She hesitated again. Going into a stranger's house was dangerous. She knew better, but something about him felt different. Inside was simple: a table with one chair, a shelf with two chipped mugs, a stove that gave off a slow, steady heat. He pointed to the corner where a blanket lay folded over straw. "You can sleep there," he said. Then he poured her water and set down a heel of bread. "Eat slow." Still, she said nothing, just nodded and sat, hands trembling as she picked up the bread. She ate like someone might snatch it away any second. The man didn't ask questions, didn't stare. He just sat near the stove, boots off, watching the fire like it told stories only he could hear. Emma didn't know what to make of him. People weren't like this. They always wanted something. But this man didn't even ask her name. And that made her more nervous than anything. Because nothing comes for free. And even calm men have secrets. Emma didn't ask to stay. She thought maybe a night, two at most. Just until her feet stopped aching and her stomach stopped growling. But the man, who finally told her his name was Will, never asked where she planned to leave. He didn't push, didn't pry. That made her uneasy. Men always asked things. Will just went about his life, chopping wood in the morning, feeding the dog scraps, cleaning out the chicken coop behind the cabin with the kind of quiet patience that made you forget the world was sharp around the edges. A week passed, and Emma barely spoke. She'd only said a handful of words, always cautious, always watching. Will didn't mind. Or if he did, he never showed it. The dog, Jasper, started curling up near her at night, like he decided she was staying whether she knew it or not. The silence between them stretched long, but it wasn't heavy. It was strange how peaceful it felt, until others started to notice. The first was Harlan Shaw, the owner of the dry goods store in town. Tall man with thick hands and a quick temper. He'd run for sheriff once and lost. That stung him more than he let on. Everyone said he was a good man, fair when it suited him. But he'd been eyeing Will's land for over a year, claiming it was going to waste under a loner like him. Will hadn't budged, never sold a foot of it, just kept to himself. That kind of peace made men like Harlan angry. When he saw Emma step off Will's wagon one afternoon outside his store, shawl wrapped tight, he smiled, but not kindly. He offered her candy, the kind she used to like as a girl, then looked her up and down like he was trying to solve a puzzle he didn't understand yet. "You staying with Will now?" he asked, voice too friendly. Emma didn't answer, just turned her eyes toward the dry ground. Will had gone inside to collect feed and salt. She waited by the wagon, Jasper beside her. "Strange man," Harlan said, like he was talking to himself. "Hard to know what he's thinking. But I guess you already figured that out." Emma didn't like the way he said it, like he knew something she didn't. That night, she asked Will if he knew Harlan well. Will looked at her for a long time, then said, long enough to stay out of his way. Not long after, another stranger came into the picture, a woman named Cora who lived near the river bend. She was beautiful in a plain, haunting way. Thin lips, long fingers, and hair tied back, so tight it made her eyes look sharp. She came by one morning with a basket of eggs and herbs, said she was checking in on Will. Emma stood just inside the doorway, arms crossed. Cora looked her over and smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I see you've got company now," she said to Will. Will didn't say much, just thanked her for the eggs. Cora didn't stay long, but her words lingered. That evening, Emma asked who she was. Well, told her Cora used to be married to his brother, who died 5 winters back. They'd been close once, but not anymore. She wanted things I couldn't give, he said quietly. Emma didn't ask what things. She could guess. But it wasn't just Cora or Harlan. There were whispers starting to float around the town. The girl with the haunted eyes. The man who kept to himself. Some said she was his niece. Others said he'd brought her in from somewhere else. A few guessed worse. And the more they wondered, the more the air thickened around them. The town was small, and rumors moved like wind through thin walls. Emma tried to keep her head down, but it didn't matter. Wherever she went, she felt eyes. Especially from one man, Lyle Grafton, Harlan's cousin. He worked at the livery, fixing harnesses and tending horses. He had a crooked smile and a limp from a bar fight in Cheyenne. He liked to lean too close and say things low, like secrets she didn't want to hear. "You and we got a little setup out there." "Huh," he said one day when she came to fetch a sack of oats. "He ain't the type to share. You must be special." Emma said nothing, but the fear came back then like water in her lungs. The kind that made her fingers twitch and her chest tighten. She left the oats behind and walked back without looking over her shoulder. That night, Will found her outside the cabin, sitting on a stump, legs drawn to her chest. She didn't tell him what Lyle said, just sat there, waiting for the panic to leave her bones. Will didn't ask. He just sat beside her. "People talk," he said finally. "They always do." "Why do you help me?" she asked, her voice barely louder than the wind. Will looked out toward the trees, then back at her. "Because once I needed help, and nobody gave it." He didn't say more. He didn't need to, but something shifted between them after that. She started asking about his life, his brother, the land, the reason he never went into town unless he had to. He told her about the war. Not much, just enough. The hunger, the noise, the silence after. He told her he came back different. People noticed. That's when they stopped inviting him to dinners, stopped asking him to fix fences, called him distant, cold. But Emma saw something else. In the way he smoothed out the dog's ears before bed. In the way he paused before killing a chicken, whispering something under his breath. In the way he looked at her, not like a girl to be fixed or owned, but like someone just trying to stand back up. Still, she knew he had secrets. Everyone did. And just because he was kind of mean, he was clean. One morning, as she swept the floor, she noticed a drawer in the corner, always locked. Will never touched it when she was around. That night, she tried to turn the knob when he was outside, splitting kindling. It didn't budge. She backed away fast when he stepped back in. He didn't mention it, but something in his face changed, like he'd seen her shadow in the lamplight and understood. Across town, things were shifting too. Harlan had started pressing the mayor about Will's land again. Claimed he had reason to believe it wasn't legally his. That maybe some papers had gone missing after the war. Cora was seen speaking with Lyle behind the feed store, both of them smoking and laughing like they shared a joke no one else knew. Emma watched it all with growing unease. Everyone seemed to want something. Power, land, control, and she was caught in the middle without knowing how or why. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Cora came to the cabin again. This time, she didn't bring eggs. She stood at the edge of the porch, her eyes flicking to Emma, then back to Will. "You should tell her the truth," she said, "before someone else does." Will didn't answer. Emma stepped outside, but Cora turned and walked away before she could ask what she meant. That night, Emma sat up long after Will had gone to sleep. The drawers still locked, the town still humming with quiet threats. And in her chest, a storm building, one she didn't know how to stop. Because Will had secrets, and so did she. But the difference was hers had a name. And if anyone found out what she'd done, not even Will could save her. Emma didn't sleep the night after Cora came by. Something in the woman's voice, the way she'd said, "Tell her the truth," kept echoing in her head like a dropped stone in a well. Will said nothing about it, just stoked the fire, fed Jasper, and moved around like the words hadn't landed at all. But Emma knew better. She'd spent too long reading people's silences. The quietest men often held the loudest secrets. The next morning, she noticed something strange. The drawer, the one always locked, was standing slightly open. Not enough to see what was inside, but enough to make it clear someone had been there. She waited until Will left to chop wood and crept across the room. Her hands were shaking. Inside, she found a stack of papers tied together with twine, and beneath that, a photograph. Her breath caught in her throat. It was a woman, young, fair-haired, and holding a baby. She stood beside Will, smiling. Will wasn't smiling. He looked like someone who'd been carved into the moment against his will. There were words on the back of the photo. Claire and Jonah, 1871. Emma's mind spun. Will had never mentioned a wife. Or a child. He'd spoken of his brother, the war, the land, but not this. She put everything back just as she'd found it, closed the drawer, and stepped outside like nothing had happened. But inside her chest, something was unraveling. Later that day, Will returned from town with a cut on his cheek and blood on his knuckles. He said nothing about it, just muttered that Lyle had been poking where he shouldn't. Emma didn't ask questions. She just handed him a wet cloth and stood beside him while he cleaned up. The tension in town had thickened. Cora stopped pretending to be polite and made no secret of her disdain. She watched Emma with sharp, narrowed eyes whenever they crossed paths. Harlan had begun petitioning the mayor directly, claiming the town had the right to review all post-war land grants. Lyle, emboldened by Harlan's whispers, had started spreading rumors, ugly ones. That was hiding a girl out on his land. That he'd done something during the war no one dared speak of. That the girl wasn't who she claimed to be either. And Emma? She'd started dreaming again. But not the sweet dreams of childhood. These were thick, pulsing things, memories dressed as nightmares. Her uncle's voice, his breath in her ear. The night she ran, barefoot and bleeding. The way she'd pushed him when he grabbed her wrist. The crack of his skull against the edge of the hearth. How she hadn't waited to see if he got up. Just ran and ran until her legs gave out by the tracks. It had all come flooding back the day she saw a deputy ride into town, a flyer in his hand. She recognized the face on it before she saw the name. Missing Emily Bennett. Her picture was smudged, but clear enough. She pulled her shawl tighter around her face and kept walking, but inside, she was falling. She told Will that night. Not all of it, just enough. That she'd run. That something had happened back home. That her uncle had tried to hurt her. Will didn't ask for the rest. He just looked at her for a long time and said, "You're safe here." But she wasn't. Not really. Not anymore. 2 days later, someone set fire to Will's barn. They arrived back from town to find smoke billowing into the sky, chickens screeching, the dog howling in panic. Will ran in without hesitation, trying to save what he could. Emma stood back, frozen, until the neighbors arrived with buckets. By then, it was too late. The barn was gone. The fire had crept too close to the house. The chicken coop was scorched black. The sheriff came, asked a few questions, but Emma could see it in his eyes. He wasn't going to do much. Not with Harlan pressing him on one side and the townsfolk turning on Will from the other. The fire wasn't an accident. It was a warning. That night, Will finally spoke of the past. He sat by the fire, face drawn, hands red and raw from the flames. "Claire was my wife," he said. "Jonah was our boy. She died the winter he turned 2. Fever took her fast. Jonah didn't make it through the next spring." Emma sat across from him, heart heavy. "I went dark after that," Will said. "Stopped talking. Stopped working. People thought I'd lost my mind. Maybe I did. My brother came to live with me, try to help. That's when Cora came around. She was his widow. Thought maybe we could make something new. But I didn't have anything left to give." Emma wanted to ask why he never told her. But she already knew. Some griefs dig so deep they become part of your bones. They don't get spoken of, only carried. But even with the truth between them now, the air didn't feel clearer. It felt heavier, because they both knew someone in town wanted Will gone, and they were using her to make it happen. Then came the letter. It was slipped under the cabin door while they were out tending to what was left of the barn. Emma picked it up, read it twice, and sat down hard on the floor. She's not who she says she is. Lawmen from Georgia are on their way. She's wanted. For murder. No signature. No return address. Just black ink and finality. Emma handed it to Will without a word. He read it, face unreadable, then folded it and put it in his pocket. "They won't take you," he said. But she didn't believe it. Not really. The next morning, while Will was hauling water from the creek, Harlan arrived. Bold as anything, he stepped onto the porch like he owned the place. Emma met him at the door, eyes hard. "You stirred up quite the mess," Harlan said, smile stretched too wide. "Folks are nervous. A girl with a record. A man with a past. Not the kind of company we want around here." Emma didn't answer. She didn't have to. Harlan leaned close, lowered his voice. "I can make this all go away. One word from me, and that flyer disappears. The deputy forgets. But I want the land. You convince him to sign it over, and you're both free to leave. No questions." Emma slammed the door in his face. But the seed was planted. That night, she and Will argued for the first time. She told him to let the land go. He refused, said it was all he had left, said it wasn't about the land anymore. It was about the principle. "You think they'll stop once they have this land?" he asked. "You think men like Harlan ever stop?" She hated that he was right, but she hated more that she couldn't protect him. The next few days blurred. Every creak of the floorboards, every hoofbeat down the road felt like the start of the end. They stopped going into town. Jasper growled at the door every night. Cora came by again, this time not to threaten, but to warn. "They'll come soon," she said. "You can't stop them." Emma looked her in the eye. "Why do you care?" Cora sighed. "Because I tried to burn the past too. Didn't work. It always comes back." The next evening, as dusk painted the sky red, Will handed Emma a small leather pouch. Inside was money. Not much, but enough. "If it gets bad," he said, "you run. Don't wait." Emma didn't take it. "I'm not leaving." He didn't argue, just left the pouch on the table. The final blow came quietly. A knock at the door near midnight. Will opened it with his rifle behind his back. Two men stood there, one with a badge, one in a gray coat with papers in hand. Emma stepped into the light. The deputy looked at her like he already knew. "Emma Lee Bennett," he said. "You need to come with us." We'll step between them. "She stays. She's wanted for questioning," the man in the gray coat said. "A man died in Georgia. Her uncle. She was the last to see him." Emma's throat closed. She looked at Will, then at the deputy. "He hurt me," she said. "He came into my room. He wouldn't stop." The deputy shifted, uncomfortable. "There's no record," the man in the gray coat said coldly. "Only a dead man and a missing girl." Will's hands were shaking. The rifle trembled at his side. And then Emma spoke, loud and clear. "He raped me." The silence was thick. "I ran because no one believed me," she said. "They called me a liar, said I was making trouble. I pushed him. He hit his head. I didn't mean to kill him. I just wanted him to stop." The man in the gray coat scribbled something on his paper. The deputy looked at her with something softer in his eyes. "We'll need to take her in," he said, but not like before. "It won't be like back home. We'll hear her out. We'll step aside." Emma touched his arm. "It's okay," she whispered. "You gave me something no one else ever did." "What's that?" Time to breathe. They took her away under the moonlight. The town watched from behind drawn curtains. And Will stood on that porch until the sun came up. He didn't know if he'd ever see her again, but he knew she'd stopped running. And that was enough for now. The morning after Emma was taken, the cabin was silent. Will sat in the kitchen long after the fire had died, the ash in the stove cold and gray. The place smelled like her still, lavender soap, earth, a trace of firewood, smoke clinging to her shawl. He found the pouch of money he gave her, still on the table, untouched. She hadn't planned on running. Word traveled fast. By midday, the town had twisted the story in a dozen different ways. Some said Emma was a murderer who seduced Will to cover her tracks. Others claimed she'd killed her own baby and blamed it on her uncle. A few still believed she was a runaway girl who'd snapped under pressure. No one spoke of the bruises or what girls like her had to survive to stay breathing. Will didn't say much to anyone. Just rode into town and went straight to the sheriff. Asked where they were holding her, what the charges were, what the plan was. The sheriff gave him a tight answer. She's being held until the U.S. Marshal arrives. The man from Georgia's pushing hard. Says her uncle was kin to a state senator. Will felt his stomach drop. Politics. Power. This wouldn't be about the truth. You got proof she did what she said? The sheriff asked. Anyone back in Georgia backing her up? Will stared at him. You ever needed proof to know when a man was lying? Or when a woman was scared for her life? The sheriff didn't answer. As the marshal's arrival drew near, Harlan made his next move. He gathered 5 men from town, ranchers with land bordering Will's, and paid them a visit. Over brandy and firelight, he showed them copies of records, tax rolls, war draft dodges, old court documents no one knew he had. He's unstable, Harlan said, grieving. A war-damaged man sitting on too much land. You want peace out here? We make sure it's ours before he does something no one could take back. It wasn't about the girl anymore. It was about legacy, money, land, the people who always wanted more. Cora sat at the back of that room and said nothing, her lips pressed into a hard line. She wasn't siding with Will, but she wasn't with Harlan either. Her eyes kept drifting to the window, like something outside was pulling at her. 2 days later, the marshal came, a tall, weathered man with southern boots and tired eyes. He walked like someone who'd been down every road and lost something at the end of each one. He didn't shake hands, didn't waste time. Went straight to the jailhouse and shut the door behind him. Emma sat on the cot in the cell, her hands folded, her back straight. She didn't cry. Not anymore. Not when they questioned her. Not when they showed her the telegram from Georgia claiming she'd been caught with blood on her hands and lies in her mouth. But when the marshal looked at her and asked quietly, "Do you want to tell me what really happened?" She did. Not because she thought it would save her, but because she was tired of carrying it alone. She told him everything. From the age of 13, the touches. At 15, the late nights. Her mother turning her back. The baby that didn't make it. The whisper of shame that followed her down every street in that small Georgia town. How her uncle had cornered her one night after church, smelling of sweat and whiskey. How she grabbed the fire poker. How she ran, barefoot and bleeding, into the trees. She didn't even look back when she crossed the county line. The marshal didn't speak for a long time after she finished. Then he asked one question. Did you mean to kill him? Emma stared at the floor. I meant to get away. He nodded once, slow, then left without saying more. But outside, things were falling apart. What was followed back from town? His wagon was slashed that night. The next morning, a dead coyote was strung up on his fence with a note pinned to it. Leave before it's too late. He burned in the fire and went inside to clean his rifle. That night, Jasper barked and wouldn't stop. Will stepped outside and saw Cora standing near the tree line, her face pale, hands clenched. They're going to lynch her, she said flatly. They're waiting until the marshal's out of town tomorrow. They paid the sheriff to look the other way. Will's jaw clenched. Why are you telling me this now? He asked. Cora took a shaky breath. Because I did the same once. I looked the other way. My husband had a girl working in the house, barely 14. I saw the bruises. Heard her crying at night. I said nothing. She looked him dead in the eye. I won't be silent again. Will didn't wait. He rode straight to the jail that night, pounding on the back door until the sheriff opened it, half drunk and angry. I'm taking her, Will said. The hell you are. She's not making it through the night if she stays here. The sheriff didn't budge, but the marshal stepped out of the shadows behind them. Let her out, he said. She's wanted. The sheriff protested. She's a witness now, the marshal said, and she'll testify to a murder if anything happens to her. Reluctantly, the sheriff unlocked the cell. Emma stepped out, unsteady, eyes wide with disbelief. Will caught her before she fell. They didn't go home. They went to the river cabin deep in the hills, the one no one but Will's brother had ever known about. The one Claire used to retreat to when the world got too loud. Cora followed hours later with supplies. She didn't stay long, just left food and blankets and a sharp warning. Harlan's not done. He wasn't. That week, one of the ranchers who'd sided with Harlan turned up dead. Throat cut, barn burned to the ground. The town blamed Will. No proof, no witnesses. But the air was thick with suspicion. The marshal questioned everyone, but no one said a word. Fear had settled over them like a shroud. Emma stood in the river some mornings, letting the cold water numb her legs, staring at the sky. Will watched her from the porch, torn between wanting her to stay and knowing she needed to run. Then the marshal came with news. There's a judge 2 counties over. Fair. Willing to hear her case, off the record. But she has to get there without raising hell. Will nodded. We'll go tonight. But the night didn't wait. On the ride back to the cabin from town, Cora was stopped. 3 men pulled her from her wagon, tied her to a post, and beat her until her face was unrecognizable. They left her alive, barely. They carved a word into her forearm. Traitor. The marshal found her at dawn. She whispered one thing before losing consciousness. Harlan's gathering them. Tonight. Will didn't hesitate. He loaded the wagon, packed what little they had. Emma stood beside him, silent. You sure? He asked. She didn't answer, just climbed up beside him. They drove through the woods in silence. The river glimmered under moonlight. Then they saw it, smoke curling behind them. Not from the town, from the cabin. It was burning. They stopped. Emma climbed down and watched the flames from a distance. Not a word from her. It's all gone, Will said, almost to himself. Emma shook her head. Not everything. In the dark, the past crackled like firewood behind them. Ahead, the road was narrow and uncertain. But they kept going, because sometimes crossing the line isn't a fall. It's a choice. And they had chosen each other. The night sky was heavy with clouds, pressing down like a weight on the shoulders of the few who still dared to walk the streets after dark. Will and Emma rode hard, their horses' hooves thundering on the dirt road that wound away from the smoldering ruins of the cabin. Behind them, the faint glow of flames still flickered in the distance, a cruel reminder of what had been lost. Emma's fingers clenched the reins so tightly her knuckles whitened. The quiet between them wasn't peace. It was the tense silence of 2 people trapped in a nightmare they couldn't wake from. They hadn't spoken much since the fire. There was nothing left to say about the past. They had both lost too much, and the future was an uncertain blur. Emma's eyes kept darting over her shoulder, half expecting a shadow to break free from the darkness and pull her back. But there was nothing but the steady rhythm of the horses and the cold wind biting at her cheeks. When they finally reached the town, it felt like a ghost. Most of the windows were shuttered, doors bolted tight, and the few faces that peered out from behind curtains were drawn and fearful. Rumors had spread faster than fire, and now the town held its breath, waiting for the final act. Will guided the horses toward the saloon, where the marshal was waiting. His face was grim, but there was a flicker of hope in his eyes. Hope that the law might still serve justice in a place built on silence and fear. Inside, the room was thick with tension. The marshal stood near the door, watching the faces gathered there. Men who'd once been neighbors now regarded Will with cold suspicion, and women whispered behind their hands. At the back, Harlan sat smirking, his arms crossed, eyes gleaming with the certainty of power. Emma stepped forward, her voice steady despite the storm swirling inside her. She told the room everything, the abuse, the running, the lies spread by those who wanted her gone. She named names. She spoke of betrayal and broken promises. And when she finished, the room fell silent. But the truth was like a powder keg. One spark and it exploded. Harlan laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You expect us to believe a runaway girl's story over the word of a man with land to lose? You're just another liar looking for sympathy. Will's fist clenched. She's telling the truth. And you know it. A man near the bar stepped forward. We have no proof, just stories. And we're tired of being told what to believe by outsiders. Then, suddenly, a gunshot cracked through the air. Chaos erupted. Men reached for weapons. Voices rose in anger and fear. The marshal shouted for order, but the room was a storm of suspicion and rage. Will grabbed Emma's arm, pulling her behind the bar as bullets shattered glass and splintered wood. The roar of gunfire was deafening, a brutal punctuation to years of hidden violence. In the confusion, Harlan slipped out the back door, disappearing into the night. When the shooting stopped, the saloon was wrecked, tables overturned, lamps broken, and several men bleeding on the floor. Among them was the sheriff, his face pale, a bullet wound in his shoulder. The marshal took control, ordering the wounded tended and the town locked down. But the damage was done. The fragile peace shattered, replaced by raw fear and open hostility. That night, Emma and Will sat in a borrowed room, the weight of what had happened pressing down on them. Emma's hands trembled as she pulled her shawl tighter around her. "They won't stop," she whispered. "They never do." Will nodded, eyes dark with determination. "Then we make sure they don't get the chance." The days that followed were a blur of whispers, secret meetings, and long rides into the hills. They gathered those still willing to stand against the growing shadow, farmers tired of threats, women scared for their children, men who remembered a better way. But even among allies, trust was fragile. Old wounds and hidden agendas surfaced, making every step forward a battle in itself. Then came the ultimatum. A messenger arrived, bearing a letter marked with Harlan's seal. It demanded Will sign over all his land by sundown, or the violence would escalate beyond anything the town had seen. Will read the letter twice, then tore it up. "We don't back down," he said. Emma looked at him, fear and pride warring in her eyes. "What if they come for us? We'll be ready." But no one was ready for what came next. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a band of masked men rode into town. Their faces hidden, their intent clear. They tore through homes, broke windows, and set fire to the few stores still standing. Shouts filled the air as townsfolk scrambled to safety. Will and the others tried to organize a defense, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Emma watched from the shadows as her world burned. Her hopes, her sanctuary, everything she'd fought to protect. In the chaos, she saw Cora appear, bloodied and bruised, leading a small group of women and children to safety. Their eyes met briefly, a silent promise passing between them. But the cost was steep. By dawn, the town lay in ruins, and the list of those lost grew longer. Among the dead was the marshal, shot trying to hold the attackers back. Will stood over the rubble of what had once been his home, the weight of grief and rage crashing down on him. Emma approached, her face streaked with soot and tears. "We have to leave," she said softly. "There's no future here." Will shook his head. "I can't. Not yet." Her voice faltered. "Then I have to." The choice tore at them both. To stay meant certain death or worse. To leave meant abandoning everything they'd fought for. In the quiet that followed, Emma packed what little she could carry. Will watched, helpless, as the woman who'd saved him from his own despair prepared to walk away. At the last moment, he reached for her hand. "We leave together." She looked at him, hope flickering in her eyes. No more running, no more running. They rode out as the sun rose, leaving behind a town broken but not defeated, carrying with them the scars of betrayal, loss, and a love forged in fire. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, they faced it side by side. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the dusty road as Will and Emma rode away from the ruins of the town that had been their home, their battlefield, their prison. The air was still, heavy with the scent of smoke and ash, and the silence between them was a fragile thing, neither ready to break it, both lost in their own thoughts. Behind them, the world they knew had shattered, leaving only memories and scars. As the miles stretched on, the weight of choices made, and those forced upon them, settled deep in their bones. Will glanced at Emma, her face weary but resolute, eyes fixed on the horizon. They had escaped the violence, but the ghosts followed close. The men who had ridden with Harlan were scattered now, hunted down by a posse that the new marshal had formed in the neighboring county. Some were dead, others captured and bound in chains, faces twisted in defeat or fury. Justice was swift, but it was not mercy. Harlan himself was nowhere to be found. Rumors said he fled east, hoping to disappear into the crowded cities where his name would be lost. Some whispered he'd pay for his sins in a prison cell. Others said he would vanish, another shadow among many. Either way, the man who had sown so much pain was ruined, not by a court, but by the weight of his own ambition and the lives he had crushed. Back in town, Cora slowly recovered. The deep cuts on her face and arm were a cruel reminder of the cost of courage. But more than the physical wounds, she bore the burden of what silence had cost her once before, and the fierce determination to never let it happen again. She became a quiet leader, a voice for those who had been broken and forgotten. Redemption came to her not through grand gestures, but through steady acts of kindness and truth. As for the townsfolk, the rebuilding began, not just of buildings, but of trust and community. The harsh lessons of betrayal and violence had carved new lines between neighbors, but they also opened the door for new beginnings. The children played in the dusty streets again, and the church bells rang out on Sundays, soft but hopeful. Will and Emma found themselves in a small settlement miles away, far from the shadows of the past. They worked the land quietly, side by side, building a life from the ashes. The baby Emma carried was a fragile symbol of hope, a future they dared to believe in despite the darkness they'd left behind. Their love, born in the harshest of times, was neither perfect nor easy, but it was real. One evening, as they sat by the fire outside their cabin, Emma reached for Will's hand. The flames flickered, casting dancing shadows on their faces. "Do you ever think about what we lost?" she asked softly. "All the time," he said, "but I think about what we found, too." She smiled, a small, tired smile. "I never thought I'd see peace again." "Peace isn't a place," Will said, "it's what we make." The stars above twinkled cold and distant, indifferent to the struggles below. Yet, in that quiet moment, there was a kind of grace, a fragile, hard-won peace that came not from justice served or vengeance taken, but from choosing to move forward despite everything. The road behind them was scorched and filled with ghosts. The road ahead was unknown, but they were together, and sometimes that was enough. And somewhere, far away in a city that swallowed names and faces like dust, a man named Harlan sat alone, staring at a fading photograph. The empire he dreamed of was gone, built on lies and cruelty. He had traded everything for power and lost it all. In the end, some choices come with a price paid not just in gold or blood, but in the weight of what remains when the smoke clears. And sometimes the hardest thing isn't escaping the past, but learning to live beyond it.